Welcome to the Mokuchi Studio podcast, a podcast dedicated to Japanese woodworking and related topics. I'm your host, Jan Giguère, and today joining us from Acton, Massachusetts, John Reed Fox. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Yeah, good to be here. Good to see
Yeah.
you again.
Oh, yes, it's very good to see you. It's been a while since we've talked. Lots of emails, but I think we first met in person in at the CAS gathering that I was hosting in 2019. I think when you came and graciously presented on wood grain orientation when designing furniture, and then doing woodworking as a full-time occupation, like doing
Yeah.
it for real. You know
hmm
how it is to have the money part work in the
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that was so insightful. Those were great presentations. You're joining us from Acton,
Yes.
Massachusetts.
Still.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. You've been a long time resident of Acton, yes?
Yeah. We've been here 35 years almost.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. It must be well established.
Yeah. It's good to not have to move the shop.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. And so you've been doing woodworking from even before that, no? You've been at it for what, some 45 years or a little over
Y-
that?
Yeah. A little bit more. Opened my, I really opened my own studio in like 1979.
Oh
Um,
my
but I
goodness.
was working, doing home kind of hobby stuff
Mm.
maybe 5 or 6 years before that, maybe 5 years
Ah.
before that. Um,
Ah.
So yeah, a long time, and that's when we lived in Boston.
Okay.
And I went through the typical: you open a studio there, and you get moved from
Ah.
neighborhood to neighborhood as the neighborhoods gentrify,
Ah.
and it just became impossible to stay
Mm.
in the city and be uh, a working craftsperson. It's just impossible.
Mm. So Acton, for people who don't know, Acton is just on the outskirts of Boston, no? Between
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a northwest suburb, just north of one more town out from Concord. So it's very
okay, okay.
very close in.
Yeah, yeah. It's right before what, the second Beltway,
That's correct.
495.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, correct.
yeah, yeah. But from seeing a few pictures, looks like you have some trees around, though.
Oh yeah, well, we're very very lucky. We found a very nice location, and we were able to build a house and my studio.
Oh,
And
great.
yeah, we have a couple of acres. Beautiful area, very
Oh,
beautiful area. So we're very lucky.
that sounds lovely. And so you also are raising. Well, have raised your daughters are. I
Well,
lose track.
right,
How
they're
the
adults now. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah.
yes,
They're grown and moved out.
yes.
But yeah, two daughters, two lovely daughters. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. Very good. And I imagine a very supportive wife, partner.
Yes, I think for a woodworker, that maybe if you're making your living doing especially the one of a kind stuff, that's probably the most important thing is uh, a spouse with a real job and a lot of understanding, a lot of
Ah,
understanding.
mm. Well, uh, I'm very grateful you found somebody like that. Yes,
Yeah, very lucky, very lucky.
yes, great. When you started as a hobby, did you start right off the bat with Japanese tools, or did that come in later? Or
It kind of came in later, but my transition to Japanese tools was pretty rapid, I must say. I started, I was doing home kind of stuff. We had a house in Dorchester, which is a neighborhood of Boston, and I'm doing repairs to that and fix up kinds of things. And um, at the time, I was working on automobiles. I was working on Alfa Romeos in
mm,
a shop in Brookline, and I went into a bookstore during lunch and saw the that first Krenov book, the
Oh,
Fine Art, and it just blew me away completely. And
yeah.
it just I bought it and read it, and it, different level of workmanship and seriousness and all of that Jim was, those first two books of his were just had this amazing impact. And so I got much more serious about what I was doing and trying to do. And both of Jim's books were very, there was a lot of process in those books,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I found that very interesting. I think in woodworking especially, people get into it because of process. And
Mm.
so that was, hand plane finishes. That was a big thing of Jim's,
Oh,
um,
yes.
and trying to do that with Western planes is interesting, if not maybe impossible, but certainly an interesting experience. So I
Mm.
kind of started looking around for what would make um, that kind of workmanship possible. Um,
Ah.
and it was an interesting time. I mean, back then, and people now don't realize it. Back then, getting any information was really difficult, and especially on Japanese tools. And back then, of course, Japanese tools were not at all common.
Mm.
Um, I mean, it was just very difficult to find any information or find tools, even if you had information. But I remember buying my first plane, Kana, from I'm thinking it was the Japan Woodworker, and it was really
Ah.
bad, really bad. I mean, it was. I mean, I still have it. It was a really bad plane,
Mm.
but it was such an improvement over a record plane,
Ah.
um, that it was, you know, thinking about it and being a little bit of a gearhead, I think. So
Mm.
thinking about like what's going on with this tool and how you sharpen it and just the whole thing about, that kind of a woodworking tool, um, made me want to get into that more. And
Mm.
so I just proceeded down that road, and the chisels kind of were maybe not next, but saws. That's when Japanese saws were just being introduced, and almost immediately took over as far it for the people I knew, just took over the market. I mean, this is such an easier, more sensible solution for sawing wood. Um,
Mm.
so that was an easy one, and then um, and if you're into, I mean, my orientation being into Jim's books, my orientation was really the craft as a handcraft. I wasn't really interested in um, finding the best router solution to everything. Uh,
Ah.
so trying to find tools that would make it easier for me to do the kind of work that I wanted to do,
Mm.
um, led very directly to Japanese hand tools.
Mm.
I mean, to me, it was kind of back then it was like you know, Western tools, Western chisels, oil stones,
Oh,
and
yeah.
so you think about how that's changed now. Like, it's completely different now, and people don't even realize like how that's what you were up against then, or up against is maybe the wrong characterization, but that's was the prevailing wisdom then, and
Mm.
I remember people. You'd read articles and find woodworking. This is when I first started out. It was like find woodworking issue number one, um,
Wow.
and people would say that the claims about Japanese tools, steel, and how the tools were hardened, were impossible for a woodworking tool. That you couldn't have a Rockwell 60 hardness on a woodworking chisel,
Oh. Oh.
and they would just make that statement like
I
it
was
was it was just common.
well, meanwhile, the tools exist, and somehow,
Exactly, and you're
somehow.
you're kind of like, well, I have one in my hand,
Mm.
so how? Yeah.
Mm.
So that's kind of how I got into it early, and there was at the time there was a lot going on, of course, in Boston. I mean, you had the program in artisanry at BU, um, So there was a lot of studio woodworking going on, and that
Mm.
was very influential to me too. Tom Hucker's work was really important to me. Um, but there was
Oh, I'm sorry, Tom Hawker of New Jersey.
New Jersey. He's in New Jersey now. Yeah, like, but
Oh
he,
yeah,
he
yeah, Tom. Yes.
um, yeah, fantastic woodwork. I mean, I remember just vividly seeing one of his early pieces when he was at the PIA, in an American Craft magazine. A lovely low table. I think it was two different levels and a grid works on the tops. And
Ah, yes,
I
yes,
just,
yes, yes.
wow, that, it's shocking when you look at it. And it's like, that's something that's more than just building stuff.
Mm.
There's more here. Um, you ought to start thinking about this really seriously.
Yes,
Um,
yes, yes.
and there was a place called Mahogany Masterpieces that was selling Japanese tools. They were in New Hampshire,
Oh
and
yes.
it kind of it was a real starting point for a lot of people. John Burt visited
Mm-hmm.
there, Raim Nelson, a lot of the West Coast guys, um, and they had very high quality tools that they were selling.
Yeah,
So
I've seen copies
yeah,
of the catalog.
the catalog is famous, right? I
Was
mean,
oh
it's
yeah, yeah.
and when they went out of business, I could never afford to go up there. Um,
Mm.
I did buy one really nice plane from them, but I could never afford to go to the workshops or anything. But um, when they went out of business, I went to the auction and was able to pick up some very nice planes and a couple of
Ah.
nice stones there. Um,
Mm.
and so that was kind of my introduction into the tools. And I was very lucky to have been around that enough that I was able to um, experiment and try things out. And then,
Mm.
you know, getting involved, like knowing the people at Hita Tool on the West Coast,
Ah yes.
in Oakland, pretty well. Uh, Kayoko Kuraiwa, who was really
Mm.
like the tool person, I think, for a long time,
Mm.
in the U.S. And so I just got into it that way. I visited Japan in, it's got to be 1979, 1980 maybe,
Mm.
and met an American who had worked on some carpentry crews there. He took me to in Kyoto to a marketplace, and I bought a lovely set of chisels that I still have. It's still my main set of chisels today.
Mm.
So really was lucky to find those, and
Yeah.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
practice, right?
19. Oh my goodness. Yeah. It's it's nearly all practice. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, and
Yeah.
that's the difference, with to me between the traditions or I shouldn't say the Western tradition because the Western hand tradition is as intense, I think. Uh,
Oh yeah.
but
Yeah.
but it's but for modern woodworking, it's that kind of committing to handwork, and you're committing to developing skills
Mm.
rather than buying solutions.
Mm.
So you just you know work on your skills.
Yeah. 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 Between the tools, once they're the Japanese tools, once they're tuned out, I mean, their potential is so great. Um, yeah, between that and if once they are working well, then it seems feasible with a lot of work, but feasible to do a lot by hand.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I felt fortunate myself to be introduced to the Japanese hand tools early on, and I had some kind of I still don't know what is the fascination with hand tools versus just making things with whatever way with wood. And if I don't think if I had not come across the Japanese tools early on enough, I might have moved on to something else, not seeing a way to do enough to satisfy myself by hand,
Hmm.
with tools that had inferior steel, or that would not allow me to do as much by hand and doing it full time.
Yeah.
So that, yeah, that had been key for me. Yeah, so I'm glad it things lined up for you as well in that way. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for me especially, again, the Krenov influence, uh, process and design wise, committing to like hand plane surfaces, and
mm,
especially in furniture where you're dealing with wide surfaces.
mm-hmm.
Um, I just, the Japanese plane was just critical for. I mean, I I couldn't imagine trying to do that with a Western plane. I just, there's no way.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well, Krenov used to make his own planes.
Yeah, and actually back then, and I was trying to do that too. Like I was copying
Mm-hmm.
that, making a little Krenov plane. Hawk had just come out with his irons back there. This is
Mm,
mid 70s, late 70s.
yeah.
Um, but there's no comparison. I mean, I'm sorry,
Oh yeah, yeah.
Gary,
Oh,
Ron. Sorry, Ron. There's just no comparison. There is, there isn't. It's completely different.
yes.
Especially if you want a perfect surface. If you want that surface and that glow, and also over a wide surface.
Mm.
It's really I feel like I try to stay out of the woodworking debate on this, but it's different for me anyway. In my
Yeah,
opinion, you
yeah,
know.
yeah. In over time, I tried to stay out of even calling it, specifically a Japanese plane. It's not so much that it's from Japan. It's just its construction, the way it's
Mhm.
made. Yeah, and yes, it was perfected in Japan, but the lamination is
Exactly.
not a uniquely Japanese process. That was very common in Europe before the Industrial Revolution. So that's, the thicker blade, the hollow on the back of the blade,
Yeah.
the way it's held in the body, all these things, right, contribute to making that finishing with a hand plane, a feasible endeavor.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's
Um,
absolutely true what you say. I mean, you look at the old Norris planes. If you look at the really old ones,
hmm,
and the iron is really thick and it's laminated.
yeah, it's
And
it
I mean,
it's
the
just
Industrial Revolution came around and
yeah,
they changed all that. But
yeah, yeah. It's just physics, wood fibers and steel and how they interact, and
exactly, yeah,
so I'm grateful that the Japanese tradition has kept it up, that we are able to enjoy the fruit of that unbroken tradition.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
no. Yeah, and what is it that drew you to the? What was appealing to the process that Krenov describes?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure I know. Well, I do know. You know, I think that um, doing one of a kind furniture, or studio furniture, um, in the 70s or in the 80s and now, the question, doing any craft, what are we doing making handmade objects in the industrial age? I mean,
Mm.
on the one hand, like on the one hand, you've made a big mistake here, like,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
What are you doing? And people go like, and people would say this to me at when I would, be marketing my work, and people would be touching it, and oh my God, and this is handmade. And people say that with such reverence, but there is the question, so what?
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
right? I mean, and you have to have an answer to that. I think, I mean, if I'm going to commit a whole lot of time and,
Mm.
essentially the adult part of my life, to that, um, what is it about that? And so I think that there's something for me, um, very fundamental in the human condition about making things. Um, uh, the act of making things,
Mm.
is very important, and people do feel that, on an emotional level. I mean, customers I'm talking about, and of course other makers. But there's that, and so I think it's a commitment to that, to the that idea that of doing something in a manner that it's been done for, well, literally thousands of years,
Mm.
um, and working in that kind of a tradition, and not necessarily doing, not doing things that are traditional work, but working in that tradition, um, to me has meaning. I'm philosophical meaning, I guess, if I'm taking
Hmm.
myself way too seriously.
Well,
But
that's okay.
but and so there's that. So you're committing to. Jim had it I think I forget which one of it's the Cabinet Maker's Notebook or the Fine Art, but he had a thing where, like, people will say, you could do this dovetailing by machine, and you can more or less, um, but why would you? And I think that that's the point. That's a lot of the point in Jim's work, is that I'm doing this. I'm not doing this in a maybe the most advanced technological way, um, and to some extent that's the point. Um,
Mm.
why would I make hand dove looking dovetails, something that looks like hand dovetails, by machine?
Mm.
Why wouldn't I do that? Why wouldn't I do them by hand? And
Mm.
and so then that infuses your work. You can push that. Jim would push it, I think, to or I would talk to people at College of the Redwoods. They would push it to what they called, like, there's no hierarchy in the work, right? Everything is primary. Uh, I don't.
Ah,
I backed
yeah.
away from that. I mean, I don't think that that's kind of realistic, and I also think it's a little bit wasteful. Um, but I will, for example, use. But on the other hand,
Yeah.
I think that you set expectations with your work. So if my expectation for my client is that this work is of a certain level and a certain level of elegance, in its construction, talking technically, it just,
Hmm.
um, if I've raised that expectation, then I need to meet it. So, for example,
Mm.
the example I'm always using is when I'm making drawers, the bottoms will be solid.
Mm.
Um, do I think there's anything inferior technically about a plywood drawer bottom? No. You'd really be hard pressed to argue that. You might be able to
Mm.
argue that it's better, so that there's that. But people don't will never know that my drawer bottoms are solid, and will never even think about that. But that's what they expect, even though it's something they don't
Mm.
know. Like, that's the expectation you've raised, that this work is being pushed at least to that level. Now, do I use secondary woods on my pieces for maybe a back, or the bottom of a the bottom of a dresser, uh,
Mm-hmm.
that's never seen it? Yeah, I mean, I don't use bad wood, but I won't use my best pieces for that. I won't say there's no hierarchy in the piece.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that balance to figure out, technically, in pieces. As
Yeah.
well as trying to be technically, this is all assuming that you're technically competent,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe a little more than that. And then
Yeah.
technically you can get a little bit artistic. Uh,
Mm.
I do think that where I started to part, how do I say, there was a point at which I realized that all of this infatuation with the technical, um, is really, not enough,
Mm.
and that it's not about that at all.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
fact, what when I see a piece across the room that really just drops me in my tracks,
Mm.
that's not about the technique. I will admit, or even assert, that it is part of the glowing nature of maybe that piece, is that it's, an accumulation of wonderful, elegant, technical things, but it's the piece being itself amazing or beautiful that, to me, is what resonates, and that's apart from all of that other stuff. And that's the hard
Yeah.
part about being a furniture designer builder, is that you have to work on that, and the technical stuff has to all be like just kind of, yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, yeah. I so get. I have chills. Because yeah, it is so true, and it's can be so difficult to put your finger on what is it that triggers that when you see a piece done like that. And just like you were saying, technically perfect is not enough. That can be very lifeless. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
And it doesn't have to have been made by a machine to feel lifeless. I've seen pieces that were, superbly crafted, but the design just wasn't up to the
Yeah.
level of craftsmanship, which was like,
Yeah.
wow, if you're gonna spend this energy, even if it was done quickly, like it doesn't have to be, slow work to be good work. But if it's technically perfect, wow, you really have to work on your design, buddy, because
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
piece still is not, there's something missing. And then in my own experience, I've been able to see where, oh, early pieces, I would work and work and work on them until they were, by eye, they were as close to perfect as I could. So no gaps in the joints and all that. And then I would stand back when it was all done and like, wow, something is still missing. And over time I got to realize like it because it was overworked.
Hmm.
I was ashamed of where I was technically, and I was trying to compensate by just putting in more time and just making none of the little gaps show. And but something was still missing. Uh, and yeah, and then in time it all sort of evened out. The being technically proficient, but then improving the design and learning where to let go of tiny details for the better for the betterment of the whole piece, so that it would glow. Um, it's a strange, non-intuitive, right, compromise to be like, oh, there might be a couple tiny flaws, but somehow it lets the work be more vibrant. And I wouldn't intentionally leave a flaw or put a
Yeah.
flaw in, but to consciously decide to let it be, then help the whole piece somehow. um,
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it's that realization that it's about um there's a lot of people with mad skills, right? I mean, there's just all these people out there that just have skills, 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 and that's great.
oh yeah.
But really, your real contribution in the end, I feel, maybe my contribution to woodworking is not technical. I mean, I do certain things that people don't do and all of that, but it's nothing new, and I feel like there's very little that's technically new in something like woodworking.
Mm.
Um, but it's voice. It's like, have you found your own voice, and have you developed that, and is that contributing somehow to moving things forward aesthetically? And
Mm.
to me, that's really where it is. Like, so that having like my work is really pretty simple, I'd say. But I don't think it's plain. I think you have to hit that. For me, it's trying to hit that balance between something that is the ideal thing for me is having a piece, making a piece that's exactly what it is, exactly what it is. It's kind of a Zen kind of like
Mm.
it's just right at being itself, and
Mm.
it's completely at home at being itself. So it doesn't need embellishment. It doesn't need you to show this fancy joinery or that fancy this or whatever, because it is comfortably exactly what it is.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and then for me, that there are other parameters about how I feel about how it's contributing to the to daily, because I feel like I'm doing craft not art, and it's got to contribute to the the to daily life. It's got to be functional and be something that uh, makes your interaction with the day to day better. Um,
Mm,
if it can do that, then you've moved things forward. I think, and it doesn't have to be. It's not about the technique needs to be there. It needs to be really solid. When you build something, you're striving for technical perfection, but it's really not about technique.
mm,
It,
mm,
in the end, it's just not. It's not about technique for me. It's it's about whether that piece really sings or not.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you know, one of the guys at the Kazuro Kai that I presented at, the one you had in Peekskill,
Mm.
I'm forgetting his name, from Canada, uh, always winning the planing contest. Um,
Jude. Jude
Jude,
Noteboom.
yeah, Jude, yeah. So he made this little. He gave me one. He made this little glue stick. Basically, it's just basically a glue paddle, and it's amazing. It it's it's just amazing. It's beautifully made, beautifully wrought, and extremely simple. And I mean, it's only just a glue paddle,
Hmm.
but I keep it up on my wall. It really does that for me. I mean, this thing is incredible, and
Mm.
it's one of the nicest woodworking things I've seen. I mean, it blows me away every time I look at it. It's just so finely wrought, and it's not trivial to make either. Like, he's like, oh yeah, but no,
Mm.
I mean, it's not trivial. But and someone with skills would know that it's not trivial. Like, this is
Yes,
really
yes, yes.
well thought out and very, very well done. And it is exactly what it is. And there's no two ways about it. And things like that, for me, that's what I strive for. Like, being able to do that.
Mm.
That's the end game there.
Mm. Yeah, a piece that can stand for itself. You don't need to be there to explain anything about
Exactly. It
it,
doesn't need any
right?
explanation. Uh, there's no showing off. There's
Yeah.
no you get that a lot with a lot of technical. It's like there's a lot of showing off going on and
Mm.
in design, and well, anyway, to me.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So that's the voice I look for. Was a famous potter, Marguerite Wildenheim, who was one of the transition craftspeople from like the early 50s, when really, the idea of the independent studio was going away, and there were a few people who kept it alive. Her, the
Mm.
Seacrests, some other people. Um, she was out on the West Coast, and she had apprentices come and work with her. And there's a very famous story about this one apprentice who was working with her and would do her own work at night and show it to Marguerite, and she would be like, "Yeah, this is no good," and over and over and over. And the woman had been with her for like a long time, like maybe over a year or 2 years, and comes to her with a piece and uh, shows it to Marguerite, and she says, I think this is it. This is really good." And Marguerite looks at it and goes, "No, you're not there yet. This is no good." And she goes, "No, I really, really like this. This is really good." And Marguerite says, "You'll get over it."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
takes that. That's the other half of it. It takes that. You have to be really able to look at your own work, uh, and for me, a lot of sitting and gazing at what I'm thinking of doing and my mock-ups and my process and everything, and being pretty brutal with yourself about what it is you're trying to do and why are you doing this, and what is this detail that I'm so fascinated with about, and is it just ego? Am I like just putting this in because I think it looks cool and it's showing
Mm.
off and all of that stuff? So
Mm.
you really have to get away from that,
Mm.
and let the things be what they, let them be themselves.
Mm. Yeah. 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 And if you have any doubts about that, once you're in the presence of an example of a piece that's
Yeah,
been made like that, and it's
that's
like
exactly.
it's so clear. You're like, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
okay, this person clearly made this kind of their style. but that's one tiny aspect. So when I look at your portfolio online, that's so much of what I feel is that okay, it's clearly one of your, all your pieces are there.
Mhm.
But when I've seen pictures elsewhere, I can typically spot it's like that looks like one of John's pieces, um, and yet it's not screaming out. It's sitting there quietly, just being.
Well,
and
thank you.
and it just I find myself smiling for no reason, and I'm like, oh, that's it. That is why it is just standing on its own. um yeah, so this, yeah, of course it's very, very well made, but often it's a little hard to tell when looking at pictures.
Exactly. You have no idea. Yeah.
And still something is conveyed through the image. And something you've gone over in one of your presentations back in 2019 was how much you pay attention to the choice of grain orientation and grain tightness, the selection of
Hmm.
the grain on every piece is nothing random. And how did you come about to be sensitive to that? What brought your awareness to this might be something important?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point you bring up because for me, it's why I like to give this little talk that I have about that, about the how you select grain. That was a big thing for Jim, and and others, but I think Jim especially. And I was kind of looking at it and thinking about it a lot from the very beginning. And I think it's interesting that I find that people don't do that very much, maybe woodworkers as a group. And I think it's interesting because, after all, I mean, this is your material, and
Mm.
and a lot of what you're doing is using the wood grain as a graphic material. And
Hmm.
don't you think you might want to take a look and see what's going on um, with that? And people don't. But my understanding of that got improved greatly when I met and started teaching. Met and became friends with and started teaching with Craig Stevens, who's
And
an astonishing woodworker, and a close friend. And we met teaching up in Maine, and then we ended up teaching classes together, mostly advanced classes. And we
in
would stress that a lot
in Maine at the
at the Center for
center.
Furniture
Yeah,
Craftsmanship. Yeah,
yes, yes.
and um, so we would stress that a lot. And yeah, one of the things I came up with is or came up with that struck me is that this idea of a cutting list. So we would have a thing we'd write on the blackboard. There's no such thing as a cutting list, um, and of course there is. I mean,
Yes, yes, yes.
but if you think about it, that's from industry where
Mm,
the boards are just boards, and we don't
mm,
really care. We're just getting maximum yield out of each board,
mm.
given that we have these patterns pieces we need to cut from them,
Yeah,
and who cares?
yeah.
And in in a one of a kind in what I'm doing, or what Craig does, there is no piece that you don't care.
Yeah, yeah.
That the grain direction and structure and pattern and all of that is just critical in every single piece. So no piece is just we don't have a cut list. I mean, every piece is identified not only by its dimension, but by its physical characteristics and by its graphic nature. And I think that that's really, really important. So the easiest example of that is that you would use if you're building a table or something with legs, four legs, you would use rift sawn material because the grain is the same on all four faces. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but you will remarkably, if you look at a cover of Fine Woodworking, or if you look at, any of many pieces in magazines and on YouTube and everywhere, they're using flat sawn material. And so the grain is different on every face and will even be oriented differently in each leg. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like it's
Yeah.
just, it's so, what were you thinking? Right? I mean,
Well,
come on, like, but so that's like the most simple, but there's a lot more to it than that. And that's maybe the tiniest tip of the iceberg. And you can understand what the grain is doing in in lumber, in boards, in a lot of different ways and a lot of different levels, so that you can make sure that if you want your edge grain, let's say you have a top that's facing you, the edge is facing you, you can
mm,
have that edge grain run in parallel lines horizontally across the piece,
mm,
rather than being slashed and
mm,
running and taking your eye off the piece. And
yeah, yeah.
because this is like you had a blank piece of paper and you were drawing lines on it like you wouldn't draw them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not hard to do, and you can take a board that's slashed and make it straight on the edge by just how you understand the way that grain works,
Mm,
and things like that. So and well, you saw the thing I did at the Kazuro Kai. There's a lot of ways you can do it, and the amazing thing is it blows people away when you show them, and
mm,
that's good, because good, you should teach this, and it's bad because, oh my God, you didn't. This just didn't cross your mind. Like, what do I do here to
mm,
have these two pieces of wood not say exactly the opposite from what I want them to say?
mm.
And I'm stuck with it because someone at the mill didn't know how to saw a log. And that's the second part of it, is that what we've come to, um, and it's just too bad, I don't know a solution to this, but what we've come to is that there used to be, in the US and in England especially, on the continent, a relationship between the sawyer and the end user. So you could have logs custom sawn for you, and people knew how to saw logs, not just for yield, but
Yeah,
for pattern. And of
yeah,
course, that's gone. And now people, they saw they throw it on the carriage and they saw for yield, and maybe they'll saw, vertical grain, but that's about it. And we have lost. I had a guy who I worked with from maybe 2000 to about 2015 or so, or 2018, who was sawing custom for me everything. And
mm,
it is really, really different when you do that. So that I had, for example, a cherry log, veneer log actually, a veneer grade log,
mm,
sawn rift the whole log.
yeah.
That's
Beautiful.
probably that was probably the only cherry log sawn rift in the United States in the last 10 years, right? I mean, that
Mm,
never happens. But that's what it should be. That
it's
should be our relationship with our supplier.
it.
We shouldn't have somebody taking a beautiful log and just wrecking it by not lining
Yeah,
up the centers, or, I mean,
yeah. It is really rare. I know of very very few sawyers. This Irian Lumber in Pennsylvania pays.
Arian is one. Yep,
Oh,
yep.
their work is beautiful. Like yeah, they understand all those things we ask about.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
and so that to me is a really a place where it's very difficult, and it's very difficult to find. Um, I wish that woodworkers would spend more time trying to develop that relationship.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I used I remember teaching, and I would always be telling people, like, you want to develop this relationship, and you want to understand that it costs this person a lot of money to saw for you that way,
Oh yeah,
and that
yeah.
you can't go in there and want to pick the best two pieces out of a
Mm-hmm.
log,
Yeah.
and you can't go in there and also want to start negotiating over price.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
if you want good material, you have to pay for someone's time and skill and investment in inventory to have good material. And
Yeah.
though that whole thing to me is sadly really missing these
Yeah,
days, really missing, and it sorely you really see it in the work.
yeah, yeah. It every time, and it's rare. It happens just every few years. I'll find some other sawyer that seems to get it, and oh, it is so heartwarming. Um, you, have you ever dealt with Sam Tallarico? You don't use oak much.
Yeah, a long time ago, a
Yeah,
long, long, long time ago. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That self-proclaimed king of oak.
Oak,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah,
old
exactly.
growth oak. Yeah, and he's one who's just totally passionate about every cut. He does buy it, just like you were saying. He
Yeah,
mills largely out of veneer grade logs.
yeah, yeah.
Um, a lot of them bought at auction by himself in Germany. so
Yeah, yeah. The spec art. Yeah, yeah.
so the level of care and attention, and yeah, it's quite lovely. Yeah, yeah. And also, when I look at your pieces, as far back as I could find, dated pieces, your design sense and sensitivity is so good. It makes me it's just an observation. It makes me wonder if you just always had it. Maybe you don't have the very very early pieces out in pictures. I don't know.
Yeah.
How did that come about? Because it seemed to be uh, so present in a very clear way in your work.
Well, thank you very much
Oh,
for
it's
the compliments. I think early on I was doing what kind of everybody does. There's my Krenov piece, and there's a Nakashima piece, and there's a that kind
uh-huh.
of thing.
Hmm.
I got off of that pretty quickly. It just didn't make. There's a good thing about having economic pressure, as you know, that
Mm,
it make you have to come to realizations quickly
mm,
and make sense of what you're doing right away. You can't just kind of noodle around.
mm,
So anyway, I got off of that, and furniture influences. I was very lucky in that actually this trip to Japan was really influential for me. I mean, it's such a visually different environment, and seeing and also seeing craft there, and not only in wood but in many other uh, media, um, be a living tradition. That was like really inspiring.
mm,
And so what I realized is that I have to try to develop. I had to think about what I was doing. You couldn't just do. I didn't want to just do things. And in woodworking's I think the most primitive of the crafts by a long way, at least in America, by aesthetically.
mm.
Woodworkers will do reproductions. You don't see that in any other craft, right? And no potter is throwing Wedgwood,
Ah, ha, ha.
right? I mean, it
Yeah,
would be absurd, right? The idea, the very idea is insane.
yeah.
And yet, you know, in woodworking, people do that. Just that's what people do. So, um, but I realized that, and I was into, a lot of other crafts in terms of just appreciation. So I looked at a lot of ceramics and a lot of metal things, textiles, and it made me realize that I needed to develop, again, to develop my own voice, and that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to do another Krenov piece, like not that I don't wish that I could, but
Mm,
I didn't. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to find my own voice, and that requires, for me, that required a lot of kind of self-examination. What is it that I'm looking at that I really like, and why is that?
mm.
And what is what do I want my furniture to do? What kind of environment? Furniture is interesting because the pieces are generally large. or significant anyway. And you can't, you know, like you can buy a textile and then just put it in a, you know, you don't like it anymore, you just put it away, or a pot and
Mm.
you put it, you know, I mean, but you know, your dining table, you don't really do that with,
Yeah,
or your
yeah,
dresser.
yeah, yeah.
That's permanent. And so it's like, how do I want that to make me feel? Um,
Mm.
and if it makes me feel that way, I'm happy. And so then I'll find clients who want that,
Mm.
who look at my work, and that's how my career ended up going. Is like people would, very small group of people, but people would, enough,
Mm-hmm.
want my voice. That's what they want. Like, you know, a lot of the work is commissioned, and they would say, I want a dresser, but they know what I'm, again, my voice. They know what I'm going to design for them in terms of its how it makes you feel in your house. And
Mm.
so that was very important to me. And I had certain design elements that I looked at very hard and tried to figure out what is my, again, with the whole voice kind of thing, having my own, developing my own vocabulary. And that's been pretty consistent. And I think that's what people see, is that I have a probably limited, but pretty specific
Mm.
design vocabulary. And people see that. And a lot of that came when I made that trip to Japan and with my wife, and all the visuals there, and seeing, you know, just again being blown away by just one thing after another. And what is it that but asking the next question, what is it that I'm seeing here that really,
Mm.
you know, that just kills me? I mean, like, or this, boy, you'd go to a temple and then just see this huge old cedar with a sacred rope around it with a sacred knot. And
Mm.
that's and this, it just looked so amazing. I mean, like, that is, wow, I'd like to be able to build that. You know, like, it's just,
Mm.
what is it that's moving me about that? So, you know, I have overhang, a lot of my work being influenced by that. I mean, you know, quote, Japanese aesthetic, which is obviously a silly thing to say, but I mean,
Mm.
it's, you know, much bigger than that. But there is that look, but it's mostly was architectural, and it came from architecture, from gardens, from bowls, from beautiful, just handmade bowls and things. And it didn't translate directly to furniture, Western furniture. And that was really good for me,
Mm.
because it left me on my own. I couldn't mimic, you know, I'm not going to build chair. It's a culture that sits on the floor, like, you
Uh-huh.
know, right? You know, I'm not going to build tansu here. You know, it'd be fun to do, but you know, who would you sell that to? Um,
Mm.
so it made me try to deconstruct what it was, that what do I like about these buildings, these houses, these farmhouses that have this grace and this way of sitting and way of sitting down, and um, a lot of the furniture pieces that have that and the lift that they're I mean, you know, you're much more into the carpentry aspect than I ever was, but
Mm.
that that sense that the Japanese house has of being super planted
Mm.
and firmly at transitioning to the earth, but it's light. It's
It,
not this brick.
yeah.
Like, how do you do that? How did they do that? And
It's
so, you know, I came up with my own solutions to that, and my own, many of them mimicking things. My legs are usually upside down. I got just teased for that brutally throughout my career. Like,
yeah.
John, don't you, you know?
Your legs are
Um,
upside down because thicker at the bottom than the top.
yeah, you know, wide at the bottom, and you know, and tapering to the top, and the overhangs, overshot tops,
Uh,
um, and then things being simple, but understanding that I would see things there that were so simple, and you see this in Japanese architecture all the time. Like, it doesn't have to scream complexity,
oh no.
but it actually is very complex. It's like
Yes.
what it screams is simple, but it's not plain. It's rich, and it's rich with the accumulation of small, gestures and small details
Yeah.
that that just accumulate into something that's simple but very rich.
Yeah. That
Um,
highly sophisticated elegance
exactly, exactly.
is perceived at a distance, and it's hard to put your finger on it, but as you get closer is just what you mentioned, is all the little details. Yeah, all the
Yeah,
little, the attention to all the little, yeah, to all the little details, the material, the way it was treated, the way it was designed, and then how it's being used, put in the right context as well.
yeah. And so I tried to pay attention to all that and develop. I think one of the criticisms of my work, and I think it's really valid, is people will say I've been building the same piece for 40 years. That you know maybe branch out a little and try something new. And I I think it's true. I mean, I've been working, and this I will say is I think a difference between the Japanese and the Western um, traditions. That for me, it's about one thing and trying to go one design essentially, and trying to go deeper and deeper and deeper into understanding that design and
Mm,
or again for me that voice and that design vocabulary, trying to go deeper into that and understand it better and better and better.
mm,
Um, where in the Western tradition, it's all about being new. So we don't want things that people have seen before. We want new.
mm,
There's uh, a quotation that I use often in when I'm doing slides or something from Yanagi's book, the Unknown Craftsman,
mm,
which is again it's a book about ceramics. Uh, but in there he's talking about developing an aesthetic, and he says when we're essentially, I'm going to paraphrase here, when we're young, it's all about what's new or old, and
mm,
when we're older or more mature, it's all about what's true or false.
mm. Oh, yeah, so good.
And so to me, that pretty he said it all. Like there it is. And for me, it's that there was another. I don't get all booky on it, but the I think it's Thomas Aquinas had a thing where he said, I'm gonna really try to remember this, but I'm gonna mess this up. But that the art is and should be or craft and art should be uh, informed by tradition, but not bound by convention.
Mm.
And I think that that's really been very key for me too. That so again, all of these things to justify my building one piece for 45 years.
Oh, yes,
That
yes, yes, yes.
that like I'm trying to go down, down, down into this idea and understand it better and better and better. Uh,
Mm.
and Yeah, and that's it. So, when I do design classes and stuff and we're talking about process, I have all these different processes that I work through that are pretty, I pretty much do the same thing all the time. And it's a good process, I think, but it's got to do with still exploring that and trying to understand that I'm not doing something. I don't do anything on my work because it's cool,
Yeah,
just because,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
cool. That's
yeah,
that's not enough of an answer for me.
yeah, 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 yeah. And yet your pieces are cool in their own way, because they're not like true coolness cannot come from trying to be cool. That doesn't, right? That doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, 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 yeah. Um, what is your relation with the material, with the wood? Do you have also a relation with trees, or how is your relation with the material?
Um, yeah. I don't know. I mean, the wood that I use as my material for working, I see it at, like as raw material. But um, again, I do think that it's too bad that the relationship between the person who cuts the tree down, the person who saws it, and the person who's the end user has gotten so separate. That's
Mm.
one thing. And then the other thing is drying. Um,
Ah, yeah.
and so I often and mostly work with air dried material,
Mm.
um, and maybe killed off at the very end if it has to be, but mostly air dried. I also work with mostly domestic materials, um,
Mm.
because I mean, I can make there's that whole theoretical argument. You should be able to use what's at hand, um, and that there's something to that. But also, I think that the American domestic woods were like world famous when the New World was like right. I mean, this was like, oh my God, look what they've got. Um,
Mm.
and
Oh, yeah.
I think yeah, I think that they're really lovely, and some are easy to work with, some harder. But there's and unfortunately, a lot of it's going away. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, it's really nice, especially if you're working with hand tools. It's really nice to work with nicely dried, air dried wood. It's so different. Um,
Mm.
you can tell by running your hand over the top of it, or just tapping it on a concrete surface, like that
Mm.
it's different.
Yeah, sweeter.
Yeah, yeah, and with wood, much. I mean, it's better in every way to work with. So,
Mm.
and then also to have material that's been thoughtfully, that this tree's been cut down now, so but that's been thoughtfully processed so that
Mm.
it's not it's not just being kind of chopped up. It's yeah, I,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, the care and attention started, that process started before you get the wood.
way before. Yeah,
So
yeah,
so you
yeah, way before.
pick it up and continue. Uh, it's hard to essentially start the process from scratch. I mean, we do often, they're getting wood from various sources, but it is sort of like sometimes feels a little bit like a rescue.
Yeah,
You pick up the piece. Oh, I see the potential in here, and then bring it in the shop, and then start to care for it, and then be the instrument to let its its beauty come out. Um, but but you can also only do so much. If it
yeah,
wasn't sawn with attention, you cannot undo the sawing. Um, you can remill, but you cannot undo the sawing. So
yeah, yeah. And something really special may have been ruined in that. I mean,
yeah,
along the way. I mean, it's pretty common.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think it's so much what you said is the lack of communication between the mill and the sawyer and then the user of the wood. Um, it's because it's not uncommon. I mean, anytime we talk among ourselves, among woodworkers, we're like, "Oh, wow, yeah, another board like that." And like, well, the the sawyers maybe they don't hear that. Maybe nobody tells them because they keep sawing
Yeah,
those boards. And like, if I have my pick, that board just stays at the lumberyard. Um,
yeah, yeah,
and eventually, there's what just a pile of those rejects, and maybe somebody with either less training or something will end up using them for something or other. I don't know what. Um, but yeah, 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 yeah. Yep, the connection with the whole process. Yeah. So even logging. My goodness. Yeah.
yes. Yeah, it's a
Um,
it's a very very difficult. I think that I feel to some degree lucky to have. I'm glad that I'm not starting out now. You know.
mm, yeah. Yeah. Speaking of which, you are you still thinking about retiring?
Well, I kind of, I just, yeah, I backed off, so I've been since I'm 75 now. So the last 10 years I've kind of backed off. I take commissions if I get them. I don't look for work is the thing. Um,
Mm,
so that's very liberating in a lot of ways. I don't have to look for work. Um, and if I get, but I still have people calling up. I don't know exactly how. I mean, some are old clients, but you know, I'm surprised that people hunt me down, but they do. And if it's, and I'm very picky. If it's a very good commission, something I'm really interested in, I'll do it. And if not, not. And so I get to now. I've been doing a lot of working through ideas that I've had for a long time that have been kind of
mm,
sitting in the back of my head,
mm,
um, which I used to do. When I was taking commissions full time. I would try to leave still enough time once a year if I could. And that didn't always work out to do something just fresh. Um,
mm,
not commissioned really, but just that I had been thinking about.
mm.
But yeah, so yeah, I don't, that's actually how that process was how working with Kumiko started. Like, I had just been thinking about it for years and years, and I finally like I got to really like, sit down and see what I think about this whole thing. Um, but yeah, so basically I'm retired now. I still teach a little bit. I have private students,
Oh, oh,
but
neat.
that's, a couple of private students, which is interesting and fun and, uh,
Mm.
but I'm in a very lucky, luxurious place to be in, like where I can just basically pick and choose and do what I feel like. So
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been several decades of hustling, so well earned.
exactly, no, exactly. People don't realize how much of the craftsperson's life kind of sounds idyllic, and people are thinking, this people tapping away in the woods somewhere, and
Oh yeah, yeah,
it's not that. It's just not that. It's
yeah,
it's it's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's hard work. Not only the work, but the business part of it. Really hard, really hard.
Yeah, most of us end up wearing a lot of hats. I mean,
Yes.
you go to the show, you make the pieces that you bring to the show that you market.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
That could easily be three different people or three different teams of people.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Um, on your website, there's listings of past showings, and
Mm.
the '80s were very busy decades for you. Yeah,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
lots of shows.
Lots of shows, lots of gallery stuff. Again, when I first started out, I was interested in doing gallery work as well, and that I kind of stopped doing that maybe midway through the '80s. I mean, I would still, if people wanted, work for a show, I would do, give them a piece for the show, but I was no longer pursuing the avenue of marketing through galleries. I decided to market direct. Just because the business of it doesn't, to me, the gallery scene just never
Mm,
didn't make business sense to me, for me. Um,
mm,
Now, I also didn't come out of, I didn't come out of one of the schools, so I didn't have any kind of that sort of background that maybe some of the galleries were looking for. But it just also, it didn't, the work is expensive already.
mm,
And if if you're going to double the price of your work by putting it in a gallery,
yeah.
now you're really, you've cut down the number of people that are interested in your work by a
Mm,
lot.
yeah.
And my work also, isn't suitable for a lot of the galleries. I mean, it's not art, I'm not doing cutting edge
Hmm.
anything.
Hmm.
So, people are buying my work as for their home. And a lot of the people who I sold to over my career, I wasn't selling to super wealthy people
Mm,
by any stretch. And a lot of people were stretching quite a bit to be able to afford my work. So I could put it in that situation if I marketed myself, but if I was in a gallery, that would not be happening.
mm.
Um, And I had some interest from galleries, and I put some pieces in, I have pieces out in collections and stuff, but it was never a big part of what I was doing,
Mm.
um, and to be honest with you, I never cared very much about it.
Mm. So when you say marketing directly is through shows and meeting
Yes,
potential buyers in
right,
person and mm,
exactly. That's what I did. I started doing the American Craft Council shows, and the Philadelphia Museum show, and the Washington Craft Show were the three that were good for me. Um,
mm,
and what I found is that for me, I would treat the shows like advertising. So I would just go and be showing my work, and I would be trying to have as many good conversations as I could have during that week or
mhm,
weekend or
mhm,
whatever, and try to build in that area um, a kind of a critical mass of people who were
mhm,
really interested. And after a while, like every year, three or four of them would step up and be
mm,
ready, because it took, kind of, my joke was that it would take people 3 years to decide to buy. The first year they find out you actually exist, so that's,
mhm,
oh my God. And the second year they really want the piece, and the
mhm.
third year they need the piece.
Ah,
So, and it also, with a lot of my clients, it correlated quite closely with how close their kids were to graduating from college.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so there's that.
We've
But
got some tuition money now we can
exactly,
spend on
exactly,
something else.
you know. So, but so that's what I tried to have, is just keep going and not trying to stress too much about, am I actually selling anything this week? But
Mm,
I'm just here for advertising, and
mhm,
I'll have this critical mass and enough people. It's a good market for me. And the Washington, D.C. area, maybe the area from Philadelphia to Northern Virginia, is
mm.
where probably 99% of my work is
Ah,
over the years. I mean, almost all of it right in that area. And um, I don't know exactly why that is, but I even had people who like were had bought a piece from me, and then were looking to move and buy another house, and they went into somebody's house that was for sale, and they saw another piece of mine. It was like, it was
ah.
that crazy. I mean, could have had it down to the zip code practically.
Mm,
Um,
oh, interesting. Interesting.
so, but that area, especially the Washington D.C. metro area, Washington D.C., Bethesda, um,
Mm,
Rockland, the areas right around D.C., and then into Virginia, McLean. And
ah,
then I was very, very lucky, and I had a couple of, through the shows, I got one client who was almost a patron, uh,
mm,
who I did a ton of work for, and great, great client, just in every respect. And, and a couple of others that were like that were, that I did like lots of work for.
mm.
So I was able to be, on the average 12 to 20 months behind.
Oh, yeah, no, that's great place to be. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. After a while, and then
Yeah, yeah.
2000s, the shows kind of stopped being good. Um,
Mm,
I don't know exactly why, but they really started falling off. Partly they became very expensive to do, but also uh, the clientele just did not seem to be there anymore, and so I stopped.
mm,
That's why I stopped doing them.
mm. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't know how these things work. I mean, you pay to be there.
Oh yeah, oh yeah,
It's not being invited and then provided for. You pay to be there all of the time to make the pieces ahead of time,
yeah,
right? Like you months,
yeah.
months.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I mean, you're paying to be at the show. You have your expenses. You're losing a week of work or more, um, and the shows, the good ones, are very difficult to get into too. So,
mm,
you're sending slides in. They're juried shows, the good ones,
ah,
and they're hard to get into, and you're not guaranteed of getting into them. So it's difficult if you're working on a plan that's like, I'm looking at 3-year exposure for a sale.
mm,
but I'm not sure that I can get in every year.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
so like a show like the Smithsonian that has like, I forget what it was like when I was doing it, there were like 120 in the Smithsonian show.
Wow.
It's a hard show to get into. I mean,
Mm.
10,000 applications, 120 people get it.
Oh my goodness. Wow, I
Yeah,
had no idea.
oh
Wow.
yeah. So um, it's a very silly way to make a living. It makes
Mm.
no business sense at all.
Oh yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah.
You know.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah. Well, speaking of marketing, at one point, you decided, I imagine, a website was in order. I don't know how
Yeah.
far
Yes.
back, but I'm sure before that you had business cards and the
Exactly.
shows.
Cards and postcards and a lot of printed material also, which is
Mm,
very expensive.
mm,
Yeah, I mean there's a lot of stuff to it, and then photography and all of that. But yeah,
mm,
and then the websites, I was probably a late adapter, but it became essential because people would come to the show, they would have previewed the show on the website.
mm.
So a lot of times people would come and they'd ask you about a specific piece. It was pretty interesting
Ah, yeah,
from your
yeah,
portfolio. So, or like they might send you a note beforehand, will you have this piece there?
ah,
I'd like to see that in person. And then also, there's just a lot of the business to it. You'd send out you'd have your mailing list and you'd send out a mailing, and
mm,
people who were very interested, you'd send tickets to,
mm,
um,
mm.
and blah, blah, blah,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
just a lot of stuff, a lot of which it's, you have to be at least, you can be the best woodworker and the best designer in the world. And if you can't get at least competent in the business part of it,
Mm.
you're not gonna last.
Yeah, if nobody knows you're there.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. You can be a secret.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, yeah. Um, and so you mentioned also, you've you've been doing some teaching for actually quite some time. Maybe some different phases. You did
Yeah,
more or less.
I was teaching at the Center for Furniture Craftsmanship. This is a long time ago now. But I taught there for a while. I very first started teaching there, teaching Japanese hand tools, and
Mm,
then I ended up teaching that for several years, and then I was teaching an advanced class there with Craig
mm,
Stevens. We taught,
mm,
I think, 3 years maybe of an advanced class there. And then these are like summer workshops, 2 week
mm,
things.
mm,
And then I taught a long program there. Um, I forget what it was, like 6 weeks or something like that.
mm,
One year in uh, they were doing solid wood and frame and panel carcass design and
mm,
construction. So that was
mm.
but that's difficult for me to get away. I mean, I have kids, like it's
Oh yeah.
hard to get, hard to get away and do a long thing like that. So yeah, and then I taught Craig and I taught together at Anderson Ranch one year too, which was kind of
Mm,
very very different and also a very fun experience.
mm,
Yeah, I like that quite a bit.
mm.
Um,
That's out in Colorado.
right
Yeah,
in Aspen,
yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
snowmass actually, but yeah.
Snowmass. Mm,
Um, so yeah, I mean it's fun, the teaching. Sometimes it's fun and it can be very intense, but um, I liked it. I
yeah.
liked it.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad you do. Yeah, it's not everybody who enjoys it. Oh, and then also it's not everybody who gets how to do it. It's one thing
Yeah,
to know how to do the stuff. It's a whole other skill set to communicate that clearly to others.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. I'm probably the wrong person in a lot of ways for it because again, well, the Japanese hand tools one is Japanese hand tools, so that goes
yeah.
without saying. But what you find is that people don't. I mean, there's good and bad to it. And so you meet a lot of really great people and a lot of very talented people too, very
Mm,
interesting and very talented people. But I did find that people, even at a school like that, the idea that you progress in the technically that you progress through practice is a little out of the culture to me
Mm,
on that.
mm,
You know, not to be hypercritical or anything, but it just there that understanding that I'm teaching. I can show you how to cut dovetails. I can show you how to set up a plane, but you have to learn. Your hands have to learn this skill,
yeah,
and just because I showed you this doesn't mean you. That's not how you. This is not an intellectual pursuit, right? You don't know. Your hands don't know this any better today than they did
yeah,
yesterday,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and they won't know it until you do this for a whole long time, and that's what you have to do in order to um, move forward. And I found that idea to be a little bit of surprisingly to be a little bit of a hard sell. Um,
It, it is interesting. It's not common in our society here today, and
yeah,
so it's a it is interesting though that it's not more common because the moment you do anything in the physical world, it's the same. Like
yeah,
it's not specific to
exactly.
woodworking that needs
That's
more
right.
practice. It's anything in the physical world. You get the concept so quickly. Can tell you in like less than 5 minutes sharpening,
Yeah,
and then but the rest, just like you were saying, it's you won't know it until you've put in many hours,
yeah,
many hours.
exactly,
You'll
exactly.
you'll get a tool sharp. Yes, okay. So yes, to put it in perspective, you'll get a tool sharp, it will cut. But like to get this glossy finish with a hand plane,
Yeah,
that's gonna be some time. You will get
exactly.
shavings the first day, but then
Yeah,
more practice,
yeah,
and then you can't just. It's not an intellectual
exactly,
understanding that
exactly.
suffices. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. So what do we do in the afternoon? Like, wow, okay,
yeah,
we can
exactly.
learn the steps of something else, but then you will have to put in the time, and I can't do that for you. Yeah,
Exactly,
yeah, yeah. It
exactly.
is. Yeah, it is puzzling to me how it's not more common. I guess we don't use our hands for enough things anymore for that to be just like an obvious understanding.
Yeah,
Um,
it's strangely missing. So even there, so that was a little bit sometimes a little difficult for me to deal with. But other than
mm,
that, but again, I met a lot of great people, really wonderful, fun people to be with.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think musicians, I think, have the easiest time with that concept.
Hmm.
Is it right? You can't play an instrument and think that you don't need to practice to to be good at something. There's just
Yeah,
that you can't argue with that. I mean, but you'd have to be some kind of freaky genius or
yeah,
something that just was born with a violin and could play it from 2 years old or some. Just yeah, yeah. Some for the rest of us,
yeah,
it's
exactly, exactly.
it's uh, it's different and it's beautiful because it's common to all humans.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
I I am so grateful for not having had any special abilities with my hands when I started because now that I've been teaching, I can tell people like I just practice.
yeah,
Anything I can do now, you can do it too. If just practice, pay
yeah,
attention, of course, but largely practice. Um,
yeah. There's also an interesting thing to me that um, uh, you get a certain by doing something over and over and over again. Um, Many people, and again, I think this is a very Western thing, that it's considered repetitive and boring, and wow, how do you do that over and over again? But I think that with a lot of things that you do physically, the doing over and over, you get to a point where you start understanding the whole thing differently and
Mm.
in a much more in-depth way. There was a um, when we were in Japan, I remember this very specifically. We were in Takashimaya, which is a department store in Tokyo, and they have a craft floor there, and they had a demonstration of a couple of women were making these oblong sort of elliptical maybe boxes. They looked a little bit like the shaker boxes, but of
Mm.
course, being Japanese, taken to the logical extreme,
Mm-hmm.
and very beautifully made. And they were doing, bending this wood around a form and this long scarf joint that they were just making with a chisel, and then they would weave stitch it together, that scarf joint together with the inside bark from cherry trees. So it
Oh,
was
yes.
beautiful. You've seen them. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it
Yes,
really,
yes, yes.
again, one of these just painfully beautiful things.
Mm.
And there was a translator there, and you could ask questions. And someone asked one of the women, like, "So how long have you been doing this?" And she was like, "I've been doing it since I was 14." And she's like, 60.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, "Well, wow. I mean, doesn't this get a little tedious? I mean, you're doing." And she said, "Well, when I first started out for my first 5 years, it started to get a little tedious, exactly like I was really. And then after 4 or 5 years doing it, I started really understanding what I was doing.
Mm.
And then it's not, I understand it in a different way and, more completely and more just in a different way. And no, it's not tedious. It's not boring. It's not tedious. And I think that that's a very true thing. Like, that you get with if you and I were to talk about sharpening, we'd have a
Mm.
very different conversation than we would have with someone who just started sharpening or someone who'd been sharpening planes for a year or two
Mm.
years, right? We would have
Mm.
a whole different conversation, and we would have a whole different way of looking at a board that we had planed, looking at that surface,
Mm.
and maybe the discussion would be completely different because we've done that who knows how many hours. And
Yeah.
we understand that in a very different way. And we understand it, our hands understand it in a different way. And our relationship with you know, our hands and the stone and the feel on the stone and which steel and all of
Mm.
that, we understand that in a completely different way because we've done it a lot and we've just and there's no other way to get that. Um,
Oh, yeah, I know.
there's just no other way to know that except by doing that. And I don't want to spend hours and hours sharpening up one blade, but I still love to sharpen. And it's
Mm.
because every time I do it, I understand better what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love I love this so much because it is never static. So we would have an interesting conversation about this today. And then 10 years ago, we would have had a different
A different
conversation.
conversation, exactly.
And then in 10 years, again, like as I work so often, I'm like, how am I still learning so much about
Yeah,
this? Um, there's never been a point where, like, oh, okay, so now I know. And then somehow just then do that same procedure the very same way
hmm
from that point on. Like I didn't know, I practiced, now I know, and then go. It's
yeah,
just that's a completely intellectual concept.
yeah,
It
yeah,
completely separate from my reality.
yeah,
Um, yeah, yeah. Like how am I? Yeah, still learning so much. At times, I like, should I be teaching? Because I'm
yeah,
still learning so much.
yeah,
Um, yeah, but mm, mm. um, even though you have a website, I haven't seen any uh, social media presence. It sounds like
no,
you don't
no,
need it,
no,
anyways.
I don't.
Um,
Yeah,
But it's something today, and I like to just to ask, what's
Hmm.
people take on it, because everybody has a different take on it. And so, what is your take on it?
Um, One of the things I noticed, well, just in the whole time I've been working, is that there's this uh, momentum uh, to be. I mean, there's a name for it, right? Or there used to be. They used to call it aura building
Ah,
back in the day when
uh-huh.
before the internet. Um,
Mm,
when the galleries would try to do that for you, like try to build your name and your reputation. But um, and there's a little bit of a tendency uh, to be tagged as an expert.
mm,
Um,
mm,
oh, this is the person who knows about Japanese hand tools. This is the person who knows about something else.
mm,
And I always found that amazingly off-putting,
mm,
um, and possibly at detriment to my career. But I really reacted negatively to that, and still do. I pretty much don't want any part of it. Like you say, we'll look at ourselves and think we're still learning, and I've still got a lot to know, and I still look at some stuff and I'm like, wow, I really wish I could do that, and
uh-huh, yeah.
how did they think of that? And I don't want to be, and that's where I am. So there's been a little bit of me that although I've wanted to hook up with clients, customers, and get my name out that way, um, I've been pretty much most of my career avoiding trying to be picked up as someone who is in some way um, a authoritative on the subject,
Mm,
or an expert in the subject. I remember when I was very first starting out, I was in a show, and Dave Sloan was, I think, with Fine Woodworking at the time, and he comes up to me and he's like admiring the work, and that's all very nice and everything. And then he's like, "Would you write an article for Fine Woodworking about Japanese hand tools?" I mean, I've been using them for like a couple of years. Like
mm,
no, I won't. Like, what are you crazy? Like, it's just embarrassing. Like, and then and then had I done that, yeah, and then you become the expert, right? Like now I'm in fine woodworking,
mm,
writing about, and later on I did, would get chased down and would do articles for them, but I don't like that. That whole sort of, I like the anonymous craftsperson thing,
mm.
and maybe that's silly or naive, but
Oh,
that's where I fall on the spectrum. I would just as soon um, the work speaks for itself, and that's it.
mm,
You like the work, good. You don't, good too. Um, I'm happy to talk with people who engage me about my work, and about tools and techniques and ideas and all of that stuff. And I teach a little bit, but I don't want to be considered anybody's master. They say, oh, you're a master. No, I'm not a
mm,
master anything. Really, really stop it. Like stop it. You know,
mm.
I design and build this stuff, and that's it.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And that's
Beautiful.
plenty. That's plenty for me. I mean, that
Oh
I've
yeah.
been able to do that. That I've been able to do that. That's plenty enough for me.
Mm. Do do you sign your work?
I do. Most of the time, there's pieces out there that I forgot to sign, and
Mm.
there were people who I had to go back and sign. Um, but yeah, more or less, yeah, I do. I do because people want me to. And people want you to. It's fine.
Yeah.
I don't find any. Hamada had a very funny thing he said about the potter, the very famous potter,
Mm-hmm.
about there's work that he signed and work that he didn't sign. And he said it's really good that because what happens is all the work that's good, people will say, oh, that's Hamada, and all the work that's not, they'll say, oh, that's not his.
Ah, yes, yes. Sam Malouf actually had something similar. I think he did sign his work, but um, somebody had asked him, "Oh, are you worried about copycats? Because you're especially his rocking chair, right? It's just such a
Who's
amazing."
that?
Oh, Sam Malouf,
Oh, Move. Okay, yeah, yeah,
Malouf, yeah.
yeah,
His rocking chair is so
yeah,
iconic. So, like you were saying in the beginning, it's like, okay, I'm not doing that my Krenov piece anymore and my Nakashima piece.
yeah,
So, a lot of people at some point they will have
yeah. They're Maloof.
their
Exactly.
Malouf rocker and maybe tweak it a little bit and making theirs or something. And then, so when Malouf was asked, I was like, "Oh, are you worried about copycats?" And he's like, "No, if it's really good work, they will think it's mine."
Yeah,
Right? Same. And,
exactly. Yeah,
and if it didn't quite work out, then they won't think it's mine. So
yeah,
it's all
yeah,
good.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, there is that knocking off thing that goes on, but I
Yeah.
try to not let that bother me.
Nah.
Sometimes it's really outrageous, and I'm like, I just really wish you wouldn't do that, but people do and think it's okay. So,
Yeah.
you know,
It's a little strange.
it
Yeah.
is very strange, but it is what it is, and you get that little thing in your stomach when you see it, but you're like,
Mm.
I can't do anything about it, so it's okay.
Yeah.
I'd rather just not think about it.
Yeah. Well, I really look forward to your presentation this summer at the main Japanese Woodworking
Oh,
Festival.
good. You're going to be there then?
Oh yes, yes, yes. I'll be
Yeah,
there as
great.
well. And I think you present on I think Saturday. I'm not presenting on Saturday, so I was
Yeah.
pretty excited. I'll be able to
Mhm.
sit through your whole
Oh, good. Yeah.
presentation.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that's going to go, but it's going to be it should be interesting.
Oh
I think it'll be interesting because again, and um, we talked about this when I was he was deciding what I should do. Because I'm a furniture maker, I'm very, at the Kazuro Kai, like I'm very different than most of the woodworkers there are carpenters or hobbyists, but I mean it's mostly a carpentry thing. Um,
yes, fortunately, on the East Coast, there is a different take. On the East Coast, most attendees are furniture makers.
really,
It
really.
is changing a little bit, and you'll see a slightly different crowd in Maine
Oh, that's interesting.
as the vibe has changed from what I used to do with Margaret in New York. In New York was heavily furniture making
Hmm.
focused because most people had no space to work, so
Hmm.
they would gravitate naturally to small scale. In Maine, there's still a lot of furniture maker, but it has expanded on the East Coast to incorporate more carpentry. So you'll see a slightly different crowd. You'll see
Ah,
familiar faces
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and a lot of new ones.
yeah.
But it has changed a little bit.
But so
Um,
that's always an interesting difference for me. So that my orientation towards, well, again, towards the technical is less is very different than a lot of people's, because in the Japanese tools world, because I'm doing furniture with it rather than carpentry, um, and other things are more important. They're just your emphasis is a little bit
yeah,
different. So,
yeah, of course.
you know, I think that'll be fun and different.
Yeah, yeah. And the subject of your presentation is cohesive design intent and material selection
Hmm.
in furniture design.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that will be yeah. I very much look forward to it. Yeah, that'll be that'll be great.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
And any dreams ahead?
Uh, I don't think so. Not thinking too much ahead, just day by day, and
Yeah.
yeah, just
And
looking forward to that Kazuro Kai. That would be interesting. And
yeah,
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 whatever comes.
it is what Jason is Jason Fox. What is it? Yeah, you guys have the same last name.
Yeah, yeah.
Not related at all, I imagine.
No, no,
No.
no, no.
yeah, what he has done with the festival is quite remarkable. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I look forward to sharing that experience with you. It'll be
Yeah, yeah, no, it'll
yeah,
be great to see you up there. Like I haven't seen you in
yeah,
so long. Yeah.
yeah. It's yeah since 2019. So yes, all right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to.
Well, thank you for having me. It was
Oh,
really a pleasure.
it's same on this end. It's been a real pleasure. Yeah, thank you so much, and we'll see you this summer.
Okay, yeah, see you then. Yeah.